In the heart of PuppetLand, a place where imagination danced in vivid technicolor hues across stitched felt landscapes, lived a puppet of unusual demeanor. His name was Max, a creation just as ordinary as the threads of yarn and scraps of cloth that composed the vibrant world around him. Yet within his round wooden head, beneath the painted smile that never wavered, Max held an untapped power, a remarkable secret poised to forever alter his understanding and the harmony of this whimsical haven. PuppetLand was no ordinary place. It was a domain where wooden arms stretched and strings danced with the grace of a master symphony conductor, led by the intricate hands and deft movements of unseen puppeteers. Each puppet moved with an innate rhythm, their crafted joints bending and lumbering in harmonious sequences that spoke of an artistry unseen. Yet woven subtly amidst their everyday existence was a truth that no wooden being had yet unearthed. A sequence of control even more profound than their traditional dance of servitude. This enigmatic land stretched out before Max on a particularly sunny day, carpeted in lush felt greens and dotted with buttoned flowers that nodded amiably in a gentle breeze. It was on this day, amidst the chorus of puppet folk bustling about their quaint city streets, that Max discovered his peculiar gift. Perched atop a hillock that offered a panoramic view of his homeland, Max's round eyes fell upon a scene of pure enchantment. Below, the marketplace bustled with life, jolly puppets bartering, animated discussions echoing in puppet speak, and the carousel in the square, turning to the tune of laughter. Everything moved like clockwork. Max watched, with an unfamiliar sensation tingling through his wooden veins, a kind of longing to see more, to experience the truth behind their orchestrated existence. As his thoughts twisted and turned, converging on the unfathomable, Max's fingers twitched unconsciously. Something shifted in the air, a ripple through the fabric of reality. Max blinked, his eyes widening as the puppets below began to falter. The townsfolk paused mid-step, dazed, expressions slackening before twitching like marionettes under his unwitting influence. A gasp caught in Max's throat. Whatever odd power had awakened within him was exerting its influence, like a breeze ruffling through strings invisible to all. The realization was tantalizing, exhilarating even. Max's disbelief soon gave way to a mischievous curiosity. Nervous yet intrigued, he tested his power beneath the dappled sunlight, willing the tailor to pause and turn, the baker to dance and spin, guiding them with a flick of his fingers like a composer at the helm of a grand puppet orchestra. The marketplace buzzed with a newfound harmony, accentuated by a melody dictated by Max. Could it be? Max mused aloud as the thrill of orchestration coursed through him. In the excitement of these new possibilities, Max's head filled with visions of grandeur. His perception tinted by ambition, he wandered PuppetLand, wandering through alleys and avenues, experimenting with his power on the unsuspecting populace with the delight of a child upon discovering an enchanted toy. Yet, with each manipulation came a growing sense of vertigo, a sensation as if his own strings were tugged at the peripheries of his consciousness. It was subtle enough to dismiss initially, a nagging whisper, the faintest pull, but present, like a shadow lurking just outside his vision. Blinded by this new authority, Max began to bask in his role, oblivious to the taut strings that loomed overhead, suspending him above the same realm he dominated. Each puppet he controlled was connected to their own invisible marionette, yet Max remained ignorant of his place in the same cosmic display. The enchantment of power consumed him. Max saw himself as a sovereign of sorts, striding through his city with a curious confidence. As days melded into weeks, his influence seeped into all corners of PuppetLand. The townsfolk grew more accustomed to odd bursts of movement among them, though many confessed they felt a larger force at play. Voices echoing in the puppet chorus discussing whether something unseen yet undeniable was guiding their dance. Max dismissed their musings. To him, this power felt innate, as though he alone had stepped beyond the bounds of ordinary puppethood into something divinely ordained. Yet, a storm brewed on the horizon, an inevitable truth veiled beneath his revelry. Max sensed the discord in fleeting moments. At quiet nights beneath PuppetLand's patchwork sky, as the stars twinkled overhead in patterns reminiscent of dangling strings, he felt himself being observed, not by those he controlled, but as if a greater puppeteer marveled at his newfound liberty. Deep within Max's heart, a heart held together by wishes sown into existence, knew this joyride could not last. The constant tug at his conscience, soft as the hum of puppet whispers, yearned for recognition as much as any note in a grand symphony craved inclusion. Alas, Max's journey of self-discovery had only just begun, for the true dance of the puppet master was more profound than any frivolous dalliance. The universe of strings was vast, intricate, and impartial to the whims of dreams. Max, unaware of the full magnitude of his fate, looked upwards at the endless sky, a realm of possibilities as expansive as it was confining. The starlit jigs that glimmered above hinted at stories untold, challenges untaken, and perhaps a mighty fall awaiting those who soared too close to the sun. Yet, emboldened by his discovery, Max felt untouchable, an emperor over his wooden domain. But the quiet call of reality was near, ushering him towards truths that danced just beyond his reach. Max stood at the wooden fringe of PuppetLand's Grand Theater, a looming spectacle of vibrant colors, with an orchestra of strings, whispering ancient tales. The crisp scent of sawdust mingled with the unique freshness of newly painted backdrops. Under the warm caress of the theater's lights, Max glistened, each seam of his plush figure shimmering with newfound authority. From the moment he had discovered his ability to control others, a sensation of limitless grandeur flooded his being. The voices in shouted whispers echoed within him, boosting his self-importance as every day at the theater became a parade of his powers. He loved how the other puppets would gather around him in adulation, their button eyes wide with awe, and their painted smiles perpetually fixed in approval. In this peculiar land, puppets performed choreographed dances of exquisitely timed sequences, their lives a harmonious ballet, once bound by invisible strings of tradition. Yet Max broke that rhythm with the vibrancy of a revolution. His every action set waves through the doily clouds that looped overhead, carrying the whispers of dissent and admiration alike across PuppetLand. Max masterfully orchestrated performances that left the other puppets enthralled. His charm was magnetic, capable of drawing even the most stubborn wooden marionette into his orbit. He spun tales that blended whimsy and wisdom. His charismatic voice echoed like an enchanting melody, sending ripples of courage through the grain of their wooden bodies. The others began to see Max as a leader, a figure who could transform their routine, pliant puppet lives into something grander. Like a maestro, he directed them to new heights, guiding their actions with subtle nods and gestures that danced with mastery. Shadows twisted elegantly under the spotlight, performing a grand tapestry of theatrical expression, and Max, at the center, stood as the radiant sun of this newborn galaxy. But beneath this passionate facade, there were layers of sewn secrets, cloaked in the twilight of the stage. Max had begun to notice shadows that seemed to linger longer than natural light should allow, haunting corners where no shadow should exist. The whisper of strings betrayed the illusion of chaos, weaving a backdrop of the unseen hand that guided his fate. And yet, Max remained blissfully ignorant in his tiny world of knotted fibers and polished wood. His consciousness basked in his power as he led his peers with thoughtful instructions, guiding their wooden hands to build, craft, and create a culture that echoed their hopes. Under his leadership, they fashioned musical instruments from hollowed wood and strings of twine, fine-tuned to sing in notes of self-defined freedom. The theater of Puppetland thrummed with vivacious energy, the air tremulous with anticipation and reverence toward Max. Each day the theater's occupants gathered, puppets of every shape and artistry looking up to him. Finding in Max the reflection of their dreams, they saw not only a leader, but a savior, one who could articulate the voiceless wishes of the unstrung. Around him, the chorus of puppets became increasingly intertwined in the web of Max's charisma and control, believing that only he could steer them towards the brighter dawn of a new discourse. His words were the gospel of their wooden existence, polished in sincerity and adorned with fervor. Yet within the fabric of these vibrant days lay Max's growing unease, whispering of shadows, the faint drag of strings barely audible above the cheers of his theater audience. Occasionally, he perceived gentle tugs at the very heart of his being, so minuscule and subtler than the expected, like a shadow tickling the edge of his consciousness. His internal thoughts, however, swiftly buried any doubt under layers of echoed praises and reverberating adulation. But in the quiet moments, when the din faded, a gnawing suspicion would slip through the cracks of his awareness. Still, he elected to embrace his role, to forge a reality where his influence could expand into newfound territories, even as the silhouette of a looming forest edge threatened to unsettle the borders of his understanding. Puppetland was becoming more than a static tableau. It was a burgeoning domain of dreams, painted in hues of Max's command. And so, the second act of Max's stage play unfolded, a tapestry of control, weaving brightly lit strands of light and purpose against the dim shadows of doubt that clawed at the curtains, a foreboding prelude to the dawning revelation yet to break the scene. In those days of his ascendance, the air of Puppetland was dense with aspirations and dreams yet to be claimed. Perhaps the unseen puppeteers, from an altogether different realm, watched with bated breath, for within the wooden antics writ large upon the stage, there simmered the latent possibility of a story not just of rise, but one of introspection and inevitable fracture. The air in Puppetland was different today. Cool breezes rustled through the village, each gust carrying a voice only half-formed, barely perceptible, as if not daring to speak its truth entirely. Max, the puppet of unusual demeanor, found himself walking through the shadow-filled streets, his feet instinctively moving, but his mind lost in a labyrinth of thought. It was evening, and the once vibrantly colored village was now veiled in shades reminiscent of twilight. A faint amber glow suffused the air, tinging the edges of rooftops and casting elongated shadows that danced with eerie elegance. Despite the typically cheerful bounce of his steps, there was a heaviness he couldn't quite shake off. It was as if the strings holding him had grown taut and resistant, pulling him back to some unseen center he couldn't identify. Every alleyway seemed narrower, every corner laced with uncertainty. The smooth marble eyes of other puppets reflected his approach, their usual chattering silenced by an invisible force. He felt their gazes, cold and analytical, as if assessing a rumor that had yet to be voiced. The whispering winds compounded the strangeness, sifting through leaves and tendrils with a teasing, ghostly touch. Max paused by a fountain in the town square, a spectacle he often found solace in. Water spouted from the handcrafted cherubic figures, trickling musically before splashing into the basin below. Yet today, the melody seemed distorted, off-key, resonating with a disharmony that sent shivers down his painted wooden spine. His thoughts were a cacophony of sound, overlapping whispers, fragmented phrases that slipped as he tried to grasp them. What is real? A voice in the breeze seemed to ask, its tone caught between a wail and a hushed inquiry. He turned sharply, expecting another puppet market vendor, or maybe a trick of the fabric canopies, only to find himself alone. Alone. That's what it was. This profound sense of isolation. Puppetland, usually bustling with laughter and colorful displays, was now a muted backdrop to his spiraling doubts. Shadows flickered ominously, shapes growing and receding under the dim light of the lanterns. It was here, beneath the watchful but hidden eyes of his world, that the whispers amplified. He could hear the click and clack of other puppet feet in the distance, faint presences that should have comforted him as signs of life. Yet each step sounded like an echo, a mimicry repeated on some unseen stage. Max couldn't help imagining a pair of immense eyes scrutinizing the village, managing each movement with expert control. The air was thicker near the interwoven tapestry of shop stalls, perfumes of fabric dyes and wooden surface polishes wrapping around him like a gentle glove. Normally, this market was alive with vibrant exchange, puppet voices rising and falling in harmonious chatter. Today, however, conversations were hushed, eyes darting before shying away, strings coiling tighter. Max watched a group of younger puppets skipping stones on a shallow puddle, their glee forced, an automatic response, cultivated by expectation rather than genuine joy. Their strings quivered slightly with each move, jerking in unnatural rhythm. Something is wrong, his gut told him, but the words were trapped somewhere deep. He shook his head, attempting to clear the fuzziness clouding his usually sharp mind. Perhaps the whispers in the wind were tricks of imagination, the result of his search for his place in PuppetLand. But what if they weren't? What if a reality lay beneath this fabric-covered existence? Something elusive, alarming, yet inherently true. As the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to night, Max found himself walking towards the outlying hills, where endless spools of time unraveled. His hands brushed against the textured bark of trees, tactile feedback grounding him, whispering comfort amidst the mounting unease. In the distance, the Grand Theater loomed, a monolithic silhouette imposing against the sky's dark canvas. He thought of the stories told there, tales of adventure and love, yet also of mystery, betrayal, and discovery. Every performance came to mind, every narrative of puppets undergoing remarkable journeys when guided by an unseen hand. He shuddered at the idea of control, not just of others, but over self, a rote existence that revolved around gestures beyond one's comprehension. Fists clenched, Max realized how naively he had savored his supposed command over PuppetLand, blind to the stringed dance that rendered him as much a player as those he led. Reflecting back, the fabric of his reality seemed sewn snugly by an unseen stitcher, each string pulled elegantly, expertly, a compulsion beyond his own will. Shadows of suspicion began weaving a tighter net around his consciousness, each whisper a thread pulled by intrigue and dread. As he stood amid the haunting lull of animate night, Max finally asked himself the question born from the restless murmurs. Was he truly the master of his fate, or just a marionette entrapped in a performance choreographed by another's hand? The answer eluded him like a torn wisp caught upon the night breeze, yet it hovered close enough that its gravity drew him inexorably into a future filled with uncertainty. Turning back to the village, shrouded in darkness, this moment of pondering did not afford solutions, only seeded doubt. Max knew he needed to unravel this mystery, to tear through the fabric of PuppetLand's perceived beauty and uncover the truth. Yet even as determination kindled within, he felt the profound solitude whispered by the night, increasingly aware that he was at the mercy of strings more substantial than he could yet comprehend. For now, shadows would have to suffice as his silent companions, and the whispers in the wind would guide his steps. As uncertain as they might be, the night stretched on, endless and open above the labyrinthine streets. PuppetLand, enveloped in its quiet opacity, stood hushed under the star-strewn dome, a village asleep to the whisper of doubts and the truth they promised to unravel. The night descended upon PuppetLand like an indigo cloak woven with threads of uncertainty and the promise of revelation. Stars, rarely seen, seemed to shy away, hiding behind the tapestry of clouds that rolled restlessly through the open sky. The theater, usually a beacon of brilliant light and movement, nestled somberly under the oppressive sky. Lights flickered from within, as though the building itself shivered under the weight of an impending storm. Max stood at the heart of this eerie quiet, a place rarely devoid of fanfare and music. But tonight was different. A storm brewed both outside and within, each gust of cold wind mirroring the tumultuous feelings churned up by the tides of doubt he had begun to sense only recently. His control, which he had taken great pride in, felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The whispers and unease that had pervaded recent days coiled around him like a relentless vine. Out of the gathering darkness, a figure emerged, cutting a silhouette familiar yet different in the distorted light. It was Melvin, the village's eldest puppet, whose wisdom was legendary, but whose appearances were as rare as the moon itself on a cloudy night. There was an aura about Melvin that compelled not just attention, but introspection, an understanding gleaned from the experiences of countless years embedded in his fraying yet ageless form. His wooden face wore the deep carvings of stories only time could tell, and his eyes glimmered with a depth of knowledge that could command oceans. "Max," Melvin called, his voice a blend of authority softened by a gentle resolve. "Step forward, we need to talk. Tonight is a night for truths." The wind picked up, almost in acknowledgement of the gravity of Melvin's announcement. Lightning danced across the sky, momentarily illuminating the theater square in a flash of stark white. Plunging Max briefly into sharp focus, the stalwart leader amid his scattered domain. Max walked towards Melvin, each step heavy with an unspoken understanding that the world, as he knew it, might be on the verge of profound transformation. "What is it, Melvin?" Max's voice was strong, but there was an edge to it, a hint of trepidation that even the bluster of confidence could not fully mask. The wise old puppet gestured to a nearby stone bench. "Sit, young one. Some truths burden the legs and weigh upon the heart. You will need your strength, for this night demands it." Together, they sat under the shuddering sigh of the storm. Max caught Melvin's eyes, an unusual mix of sadness and assurance residing within them. The air, charged with electricity, seemed to hold its breath, anticipating revelation. Melvin began, "For years, you have risen to lead the puppets of PuppetLand. With your guidance, we have seen times of prosperity and peace. And yet, a shadow lingers, a shadow of which you are unaware, but which I must unveil tonight." Max frowned, an ominous sense of despair threading through his anticipation, gnawing at his previous certainties. "What shadow? Speak plainly, Melvin." Melvin bowed his head momentarily, as if collecting his thoughts from a great depth. When he lifted his gaze again, it burned with a determination to impart a truth long withheld. "Do you feel the tug, Max? A pull not born of your own will? Perhaps in moments of silence or in those lingering doubts that seem unreasonable yet so persistent?" Max nodded slowly, an unwelcome tremor of recognition winding its way through his wooden frame. "That tug," Melvin continued, "is the echo of your own strings, a connection not visible to you, but real nonetheless. You, Max, were never free of control." The words struck like the crack of thunder in the distance. Max recoiled, instinctively denying, as he immediately looked at his arms, searching for the hidden bindings Melvin spoke of. "No," he muttered weakly, disbelief etched across his features. "That can't be true. I've always controlled." "Remember the old tales of our kind," Melvin interjected softly. "Stories of strings not seen, yet felt. You, like us all, have strings deciding your moves." The patience in Melvin's voice carried a gravity that steadied Max's faltering heart, even as the revelation unraveled every belief he held dear. Lightning split the sky again, revealing Melvin's outstretched hand pointing at Max, not an accusation, but revelation. The web of strings subtly shimmering, wires meant for control now visible in the electric sky. Max's mind swirled with chaos. The control he wielded over his fellow puppets, the decisions he'd steered for so long, now tainted with the knowledge that somewhere, someone held his marionette rig. Who controls me? The question broke from him as a cry, desperate and searching. The storm's howl answered as Melvin turned his gaze towards the horizon, perhaps seeing beyond to a place or presence unknowable to the likes of peers. Control exists beyond our sight, beyond mere watchers and manipulators. It is in purpose and destiny, in the blend of chance and choice. To some, it is the unseen hand of another. To others, it is fate itself. With his old, wise hands, Melvin touched Max's own, embodying solidarity as the rain began to fall in earnest. The drops carried with them clarity and peace amid their chill. Now you see, Max, you have the power to choose within your bounds, even when you don't control the bounds themselves. This is both your responsibility and your liberation. The realization settled like the storm, neither comfortable nor wholly frightening, but teetering on the edge of both. Max felt the weight and release of understanding. What felt like chains moments ago now seemed bearable, a puzzle piece fallen into place. He looked into the sky, each raindrop a part of a greater storm he could not command, but could still understand. The world, vast and mysterious, seemed more interconnected than before. Max might not control every chord in the symphony of PuppetLand, but he could choose his note, his melody between the dazzling measures of life. In the encroaching quiet of the storm's lull, Max knew chaos too had its place, and in its heart, the whisper of profound change always hovered near. In PuppetLand, the day seemed to echo with an endless rhythmic harmony, a song that had always been there, comforting in its predictability. But as dawn broke one particular morning, Max found that the melody had shifted, and what once felt like serene orchestration became a discordant symphony. The vibrant threads of PuppetLand, so seamlessly woven together, had begun to unravel, and Max stood as an unwilling witness to the chaos unfolding. The towering theaters, once bastions of color and tale spun in fabric and yarn, now stood like solemn giants under the pale morning light, their shadows cast long and uncertain. Max, at the heart of this quivering world, felt an unfamiliar weight upon his wooden frame. The whispers that once spoke of power and supremacy now only carried emptiness, reminding him of a truth he could no longer ignore. He was but a puppet, and the strings had always belonged to another. He sat in the town square, where so many stories began and ended, where the laughter and smiles of countless nights seemed like distant echoes in the sudden stillness. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying with it fragments of old paper scripts, pieces of dreams that now danced mournfully before his weary eyes. The other puppets, those he once controlled with an iron will cloaked in charm, lay scattered around like marionettes whose shows had come to an abrupt and unwelcome end. Their eyes, sewn onto their fabric faces, seemed to accuse him silently, deep pools that reflected his despair back at him. Max's hands found their way to his head, a gesture of desperation and confusion, his fingers trembling as they clutched at nothingness. Who am I? The question rose in him like a tide, threatening to sweep him away. He had once felt invincible, his sense of self so entwined with the wielding of power that without it, he was untethered, adrift in his own mind. He tried to remember when things had begun to drift apart, when the control slipped from his grasp like fine sand through a sieve. Was it the whispers many ignored, now frenzied cries in his head? Could it be the fleeting grip of a power never truly his? PuppetLand itself seemed to answer him with creaking, mournful echoes from its weary foundations. As he grappled with his unraveling identity, the village around him broke apart. Splinters of wood and threads littered the ground like gentle snow, remnants of performances that had never been.
Stalls that sold vibrant fabrics and bright buttons stood forlorn and abandoned under a sky that carried the color of spent dreams. The grandiose theater, heart of Puppetland's joy, now stood silent and foreboding, the curtain forever drawn on the illusion of control and mastery. The puppets that had once danced elegantly to the rhythm of life's string pulled now lay inert, eerily silent, like players waiting for a play that would never come. Max's reflection in a pool of dew caught his eye, a face he barely recognized. In the depths of his despair, he saw not the crafted features of a puppet, but the hollow eyes of one understanding their limitations for the very first time. Through the fog of his dismay, the illusion of agency disappeared, leaving only stark reality in its wake. Desperation clawed at his thoughts. Perhaps, if he clung to the remaining threads of whatever had constituted his old life, things would change. Puppetland might return to what it once was. But deep down, he knew this was futile, a child's hope dissolving into the stiff face of practicality. Yet, amid the ruin and remnants, Max began to understand there was a seed of possibility, tiny yet infinite in its silent promise. It whispered of resilience, of the rebirth that followed destruction, of crafting something new from the very bones of what had been lost. His fingers, loosening their futile grit on unraveling threads, moved instead toward the scattered tools of his past craft. A forgotten needle, a dulled pair of scissors, threads of every color stretching like spectral veins across the debris. A new chapter awaited, a narrative he had not yet imagined. Unfurling from the jagged seams of this breaking point, the sun, pulling free from the scudded curtain of clouds, cast its first light across the ruinous landscape of Puppetland. It was a hesitant glow, touching every broken piece gently, breath sharply drawn as nature's sigh whispered of new starts. Despite the chaos, despite the devastation that marred Puppetland, a murmur began amongst the fallen. It was a voice not of one puppet's command, but of collective assent, arising from what had shattered. Max lifted his eyes to meet this new dawn, a quiet understanding stealing over him. Not of control regained, but of freedom hard-won. Freedom from the strings. As the light warmed his face, he knew that while the past was often an unforgiving master, the future beckoned with the soft certainty of an open stage. Promise threading the spaces where strings had ruled. Max smiled, tentative yet real. The narrative was not over, merely starting anew, and somewhere deep within, he knew he would not face it alone. Slowly, carefully, he rose from the center of chaos, ready to begin again.
The morning unfolded across Puppetland with a hushed serenity, as though the very world knew of Max's inner turmoil and sought to console its fragile puppet. The dawn's gentle hues painted the sky in ribbons of pink and gold, a soothing contrast to the chaotic disarray of emotions boiling within Max. Yesterday's revelations lay heavy on him, the echoes of the truth still bouncing in the caverns of his mind. He was, after all, just a puppet, powerless in the grand play orchestrated by unseen hands. Yet, as he stood facing the nascent sun, a sense of calm descended upon him, a balm to his fractured spirit. The realization had broken him, splintered his sense of self like wood cracking under pressure, and yet, at the same time, the shards glimmered with potential. Max had always known himself to be different, but now it was clear why. He was an object of manipulation, but perhaps he didn't have to be merely that. Amid the chaos had come clarity, a path woven out of the tangled threads of desperation and newfound recognition. Max inhaled deeply, the crisp morning air cool in his wooden lungs, and with each breath he felt the tendrils of his old life loosening. Where once strings bound him in spirals of obligation and authority over others, they now felt almost like cords of opportunity, pathways rather than scripts. He was tied, yes, but not doomed, he realized. He could choose to move differently, even within these confines. The village was still asleep, its puppet inhabitants slumbering under the warmth of woolen covers. Max wandered through the streets, a ghost amidst the silent homes that bore witness to his journey. He walked past the grand theater, where once he commanded and dictated stories, now only to feel their echo resonate through him like an ancient dirge. The memories of past glories shimmered in the morning light, victories laced with the poison of ignorance now glowed with bitter understanding. Each step Max took was a dance against the stillness, his strings a partner in this rhythmic meditation. He moved to the outskirts of PuppetLand, where nature wrapped the landscape in its quiet grandeur. Hills rolled under the horizon, and the trees, tall and silent, seemed guardians of secrets older than any puppet that danced below them. Here, surrounded by untouched nature, Max surrendered himself to contemplation. He sat on a softly textured moss-covered stone, its surface cold yet welcoming. His strings were still visible, taut and persistent, but there was a peace now in acknowledging them, an acceptance that he had avoided until this moment. He closed his button eyes, and with it came the imagery, flashes of his past life, moments of control, and with them, the faces of the puppets he dominated. Max allowed himself to enter this internal journey, riding the waves of memory with a courage he hadn't thought himself capable of. He faced the disregard, the blindness with which he had operated. In this quiet introspection, he saw the puppet he had become, an image filled with the distortion of unchecked power. Yet this revelation was different. It was softer, couched not in the chaos of his revelation, but in the hues of understanding. With each exhalation, Max released a part of this burden, pieces of his constructed illusions breaking off and dissolving into the universe. The truth of him, raw and unveiled, was a daunting vision. Still, it was his, to own, to understand, and to make peace with. He might be a puppet, but this fact did not prohibit introspection or growth. The sunrise unfolded in earnest now, each ray almost a string of its own, pulling the dark veil of night gently away to reveal this new understanding. Max's eyes opened, reflecting the dawn as his strings shimmered, not with power, but with potential, a living tapestry of choices yet to unfold. He understood now, with painful clarity, that the control he once wielded was a mirage, a comfort blanket flapping against the gusts of reality. Max stood from his meditative perch, more sure-footed, more grounded. The strings felt lighter now, not because they had changed, but because he had. The wisdom drawn from this dawn was new, a knowledge that limitations did not equate to confinement, and that even a puppet could ponder, reflect, and ultimately transform. As the village began to stir, with wagging of sleepy marionette limbs and the first murmur of awakening, Max ventured back to his home. The streets, now warming under the spreading sun, seemed less of a stage and more of a path laid out for discovery. This journey inward was only the beginning, and Max, realigning his strings, ready to embrace the puppet he had become, smiled, for there was peace within acceptance.